the rates are going down, believe it or not.
Well, you know, the big New York Metropolitan Transit Authority borrowed 10-year money this week at 1
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dave Crouch. This is the Public Affairs Roundtable, monthly program produced by the Williamson Inc., the Williamson Chamber of Commerce. We are glad to have you with us this morning and hope that you find our program helpful. We've got three guests with us this morning that I think are going to be very interesting to let us pick their brains. With us this morning, we got the Mayor of Franklin, Dr. Ken Moore.
Morning, Dave.
We got Russ Truill, who is, and I didn't get your exact title, but I think Director of Finance for the City of Franklin. Is that close?
That's close enough.
And Jonathan Marston, who I did get his title, Assistant Director of the Engineering Department there.
You got it.
So we, and specifically this morning, we would like to delve into all the capital improvements that the City of Franklin has got planned over the next 10 years, as y'all have documented here recently. And but first, I want to talk about maybe one of the biggest capital improvements in the City of Franklin that was dedicated Wednesday morning, Dr. Ken. Columbia State had their ribbon cutting grand opening Wednesday morning. You played a prominent role in that ceremony, and maybe have taken a little bit bigger role in that than I had realized in the past. But that was quite a day.
For those that maybe don't know what Dave is exactly talking about is Columbia State Community College, based out of Columbia, has 5 campuses, and one of the campuses happens to be in Williamson County. It's been their second largest campus up to this point, and they've been for a number of years working out of an old technology campus over on Hillsborough Road next to the animal shelter in Franklin High School. Despite probably the most adverse circumstances any college could have, they have one of the highest retention rates in the whole TBR system, and have educated some outstanding people for those 2-year degrees that have gone on to many of the major colleges in America. There's been a number of people in the community. It's been a community initiative to build a new campus. So number one, it's really unique for any college ever to have the experience to build a brand new campus. And so thanks to financing from the state that was engineered to Charles Sargent, thanks for so many people in our community that worked, we have been able to build 3 buildings of the 10 buildings for Columbia State. This gives them an opportunity to expand the number of majors they can offer, gives more sophistication to the technology that they can expose the students to, and also an opportunity to continue to build that relationship in our community, and also to build that relationship with our businesses. They're a very active part of our community already, and I think that with this state-of-the-art campus, good things are going to happen. So they didn't.
It was very impressive. As a parent who has recently taken tours of several colleges and universities, I've never seen anything any better on any college campus. It's a beautiful campus, beautiful buildings. The labs are state-of-the-art, just like anything you would see at a major university. Wow, it's going to make a huge difference, I think, not only in Columbia State, but in the opportunities here for our kids.
Well, it's going to be a huge economic generator. Already I hear from the developers with the properties in that vicinity talking about how they'll bring their prospective clients to see what they're developing,
right,
and then they'll take them back to Columbia State, and all of them are very impressed, and that is certainly a draw going
right
forward. So it's exciting for our community.
I hope to have Dr. Smith on this program sometime in the near future, and have her talk about some of the programs that they've initiated, and maybe you can be a part of that, Mr. Mayor.
I'd love to. It'd be my pleasure to talk about it.
Let's move on to Franklin's capital improvement plan. It is actually a real plan that's been obviously a lot of time spent putting it together. And I didn't count the pages, but it's 200 plus pages of projects that you all have identified that you want the city to do over the next 10 years, or to select from to do over the next 10 years. And before we dig into the details, I should have spent a little bit more time getting to know Russ and Jonathan. So let me back up just a minute and circle back. Russ, you're the finance director of the city, and we'll get into the detail in a minute, but tell us a little bit about how long you've been in your position and what you've seen the city of Franklin do from a financial position.
Well, both from a financial and a capital project position. I came in January of 2004, and there were a lot of projects underway at that time, and a lot of question marks about how we were going to finance them. In fact, I went back, I've been doing some house cleaning, and I pulled a copy of the review appeal, if everybody remembers the review appeal, from March of 2006, and it's talking about the aldermen are currently reviewing the city's capital improvements plan, a 5-year proposal that totals $187 million.
Wow.
Well, a lot of those projects have been completed, but obviously there's a lot in front of us. What my role has been is to try to figure out how to make the money match with the projects, to put it simply.
Well, if you can do that, we're going to give you a promotion here soon, and
He can do it.
And we'll let you help the state figure that out too. So
It's hard to do.
it's a big job, and appreciate your input. Jonathan, how long have you been assistant director of engineering?
I've been assistant director about 4 months.
Okay.
Been with the city of Franklin. I'm pushing my 11th year right now. So October 2005 is when I started, and my 10 years. It seems like a long time sometimes, but when I look back in a short amount of time, we've done a lot of things at the city of Franklin. So we've been blessed to do a lot of projects for a city our size, especially.
Right. So this is a 10-year plan. I see there are 7 city departments that have projects involved in it. The bottom line is $286 million. Russ, without getting into the weeds too deeply, but where are we going to come up with $286 million?
Well, that's a good question, and it's the question that keeps me up at night. You can start to break down that $280 million in projects. For example, included in as one of those departments in those numbers is about $40 million worth of water and sewer projects. I think that's a fair amount, Jonathan. And those are in a special revenue funds that come from the water and sewer fees. So those will take care of themselves, if you will. We may have to borrow some money. Obviously, we're borrowing money for the big sewer plant expansion. But all of that will be paid aside from taxes. That will come from the fees that our ratepayers pay. So
in other words, in my water bill and water and sewer bill and that wastewater fee on my water bill.
Yeah, you'll see that, and you've seen it over the last 6 or 7 years. We've been slowly raising the rates to try to get them to the point where they will self-fund some of these projects that are out there. So you can take that little bit off the table. That leaves roughly $240-ish million.
Right.
You know, an ambitious goal for us is to try to do half of those. And I think Jonathan would tell you that the projects that are included are not wish list projects. They're projects that we really think need to be done in the next 10 years. But we also understand financially we probably are not going to get there unless, at least from conservative planning, we can't expect to be there. We hope we have some good positive surprises as we have in the last 20 years. And maybe we can be a little more ambitious as we go along.
Right.
But right now, that's what we're trying to tackle. Just for your audience to let them know, I mean, there is more than just property tax involved in doing this. You know, most of the sales tax ends up going to fund operations, but we do have impact fees, road impact fees, facilities taxes, hotel taxes and other things that we set aside in separate funds, and those funds can contribute to these projects.
Right. Yeah, what I was kind of interested in is how many of these fees and taxes I'm going to pay versus somebody else. So I was happy to see 15 million coming from the hotel motel tax, because I know I'm not going to have to pay that one. TDOT, you're looking for about $10 million from TDOT on the MPO projects I see. Road impact fees. Now, who pays road impact fees, just for our audiences?
Those are paid by developers, as do subdivisions or new commercial construction is done. Those fees are assessed and collected, and we bank that money so that we have that available for some of these projects.
So as long as I stay in the house I'm in, I won't pay any of those fees,
You
right?
won't. The idea, and you've heard it for as long as I've been in Franklin, is growth needs to pay for itself. You know, it doesn't quite get there, but we try to make it as close as we possibly can by assessing these fees.
Well, that's almost 40% of the total $110 million I see is coming from the impact fees. And now, did y'all adjust those recently? And the only reason I'm asking that is because I ran across, I don't know where I got this, but it was a 2014 road impact fee update, so I assumed that something was changing at that time.
The statute that allows us to charge that recommends, advises us to review that every 3 to 5 years. During the downturn, we obviously didn't do it as frequently, but we're on a track now to try to do that every 3 years to make sure that as prices go up, we're collecting the appropriate amount.
Right. Jonathan, tell us a little bit about the process, how you came up with this list. How many projects are there total? I didn't
Total projects right now, there are 2 facilities projects, 19 parks and recreation projects, 43 public utility projects, 6 stormwater projects, and 42 transportation projects. And it seems like every time we meet, some more get added to the list, so it's an ever-growing number.
I got 1 or 2 I'd like to add.
Talk to me after the meeting, we'll get it added. How do they get added to the list? It's really, we started out with staff bringing recommendations from old long-range planning documents. So we always look at our planning documents and see where we want the city to be, or where we've expected the city to be in the next few years. We look at areas of current development, proposed development, where we're going to see those needs at, and we try to bring those to our board of mayor and aldermen. Of course, we get citizen input, so a lot of times you'll hear from a bunch of citizens when a lot of people are telling you the same thing. It's good to listen.
Right.
So we hear things from our board of mayor and aldermen. So really that input comes from everywhere, and we try to get that list of projects together, what we're going to need. And in the past, we've done that in a 5-year cycle, and we've updated that plan every 2 to 3 years. What we're going to try to do now is look at that a little longer range, look at it a 10-year cycle, but we're going to try to go back and rehash that information every year along with our budget process.
Gotcha. Mr. Mayor, how did the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, what was your involvement, and how did you all help them come up with this list, and how does it go from here?
Well, I think it's still a work in progress. In fact, staff brought us this list of projects, and we've actually been adding a few as we've been going forward, and we have a deadline for all the aldermen to turn in any additional projects that they may think need to be on this list. I think it's toward the end of the month, or maybe it's the next board meeting, and then from there they're going to be providing us, staff will provide us with a spreadsheet where we can then start to rank our projects. And rather than doing a 1, 2, 3, 4, we've been asked to identify $30 million worth of projects in one group, and then take another look at it and add $100 million projects. So for example, McEwen 4, and Jonathan can correct me if my numbers are wrong, that's a $23, $24 million project. If I pick that project in the $30 million, then I've got to go find some smaller projects to go along with it. And there are a lot of worthy, needy projects in that, single $1 million project, whether they're IT projects or whether they're lesser intersection improvements and so on.
Just getting into specifics, then, I see the fire department looks to me like it's the least ambitious of the departments. It's only got one project on the list, and that's another fire station. I would have expected to see some fire trucks and things like that on it.
In the past, we've typically looked at facilities and large major projects, and we've kind of taken that approach again just to kind of wet our feet and get into this process, because we're changing the process a little bit, well, quite a bit, to go to a 10-year. So this is kind of the first major need we know of for our fire department, is the fire station in the Goose Creek area. I think as you see this plan develop and what we've had internal staff discussions, is you'll see those true, anything we would envision being a capital improvement. So like you said, a fire truck, major purchases like that will start to be incorporated in this in its future versions.
Okay. And is the funding source for that fire station, you're anticipating the facilities tax, I think, just to kind of get us familiar with the process. What is the facilities tax and who pays that?
I will let Russ answer that question. He's the money man.
Okay, yeah.
The facilities tax was created as a fee that the developers pay in order to account for the needs we have in fire, police, parks, and sanitation resulting from growth.
Okay.
So if they're adding a subdivision of 200 homes, a certain amount of money needs to come from that.
Right.
To build the next fire station,
Okay.
or to add to the number of patrol cars that we have, et cetera.
Right.
So this particular item, which is in excess of $5 million, will come entirely from facilities tax.
Okay. So I don't have to pay that then. Okay.
You keeping track of that. I'm gonna look
He's
at that
keeping
list
score,
afterward. He's
I
keeping
can
score.
tell, yeah.
Yeah, we'll go back and sharpen our pencils. Over Jonathan, yeah. What's that address? I didn't get your address there, Dave.
It's Dave yes or Dave no.
They say follow the money, so anyway. The next list, the Parks Department has about 20 projects. The first 7 all have to do with Harlansdale. Looks like that's a little over $6 million. And again, that's hotel motel tax, it looks like, that's paying that. Is that right?
It can be. It can also be facilities tax, and
Okay.
it can also be general revenue money.
Right. Mr. Mayor, tell us about the vision for Harlansdale and all these projects that are included. Do you need your book?
No, I think I'll just try to work from memory. Well, first of all, Harlansdale Park is certainly our central park, and we're very blessed to have it, and we continue to see the vision of how important Harlansdale Park is going to be in our future. As we've worked with Friends of Franklin Parks to renovate the historic National Registry barn, as we've worked with Friends of Franklin Parks to build a $1 million+ multi-purpose horse arena, as we look to continue to make that barn usable for events, as we look to build trails, continue to bring a horse back to Harlansdale, as we look to continue to renovate the historic home that's there on the property. All those things that we're looking at. You know, the challenge again is just where does all the money come from? And fortunately, we have a great partner in Friends of Franklin Parks that has helped raise a lot of money. And we learned that from other communities, that many of them had foundations or LLCs that helped facilitate building additional facilities, and certainly Friends of Franklin Parks have done that. You know, I think that the recent 10-year parks study was an important document for us to do, and in fact, I like to say that we're a city that plans way, way out in the future, and so one of those plans was the parks plan that looks 10 years out in the future, takes an inventory of what our parkland is and the types of parks we have and the types of current facilities we have, and then it looks at what our needs are for the next 10 years. And it's a pretty ambitious plan. I remember it's somewhere in the $60+ million over the next 10 years, just off the top of my head. But probably one of the most crucial needs that we've identified is a park in the southeast area of Franklin. You've got an area of Franklin that at build out is going to have 14,000 people.
And
so we've
specifically, where is
that's,
what area are you talking
that's
about?
down Carruthers South, Ladd Park, Stream Valley, Berry Farms,
Got it.
down in that area.
Okay.
So we'll be looking critically at how we can possibly build a park in that area. We have some land already in that area, and we've identified that there's specifically a lot of needs for more ball fields, and there are new sports that are coming on. Lacrosse, which is something that we didn't know how to spell in high school, is now you know, a common comment
Right.
among our kids and students that they want lacrosse fields. It's also interesting, identified that we need to start considering an indoor facility for the city. Typically, in the past, we have been more responsible for outdoor facility and ball fields and things, and the county has been more on the facility type. So it's exciting times, I know, for the Parks Department to see. Again, this will be a unique thing to build another brand new park, and certainly is needed. And just with the growth we're having, we have to keep up with the demands for our community for parkland, and that's part of having a healthy community, is making sure you have those spaces where people can go exercise and enjoy time with their family, have those organized sports events. One of the things that I've enjoyed seeing just in the last few months is as the city has mapped out the Harpeth River with various mile markers on it, and we've been building canoe access launches on the Harpeth River. Suddenly we're seeing all these kayaks and canoes in the Harpeth River, which is that's the goal. I mean, the Harpeth River is one of our most valuable resources we have, and so it's great to see the community using those canoe launches and being more active, and so I think it's good payback for us.
My family's very much enjoying that canoe access up at Ladd Park, because that's about 5 miles upriver from our home, and every couple of weeks, sounds like my youngest son is loading up 4 or 5 of his friends and a couple of kayaks and a canoe and heading up there to do a canoe trip down the river. So it's being used and appreciated. So now, a big part of these park improvements, Russ, is coming from what's something called parkland dedication. And what is that?
That's something new that's been incorporated for the last several years, where we're asking developers to either put park space in their development or pay a fee in lieu of that.
Okay.
So some money has been accumulated there, and that's a potential source for some of these parks projects. As the mayor was mentioning some of the parks projects, it occurred to me also we ought to mention that this is one of the departments that we have that's susceptible to receive grants.
Okay.
There are, a lot of the things that we do, there just really aren't any grants available. Parks happens to be one of them, so
Right.
that will make it a little more difficult in the prioritization process and the funding process, because we may have to time some of the things to coordinate with grants that we might get.
Right. Well, and forgive me for harping on where this money's coming from, but I was pleasantly surprised to see that most of it is from the impact fees and from the fees that the new folks are paying. I love the growth that we're having, and but it is kind of comforting that I'm not having to pay for those new parks that are in other parts of the city. So I think y'all are doing an excellent job of looking forward and trying to take it easy on the existing residents and not unduly tax us for new growth.
Well, if I may, I think the tribute goes back to the 1990s when the city had the foresight to enact these impact fees and adopt them. If you will go across the state, there aren't that many cities that actually have these fees incorporated that ask for development to pay for itself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a great blessing that Franklin looked ahead and did that.
Well, it's it looks like only 42 million out of the 286 is coming from the general fund, which, and of course, the property tax is part of that general fund, right?
That's a lot of money for the general fund, though.
So, kudos on that. The next area of interest, new city hall, Mr. Mayor. About $24 million in the out years, it looks like, in planning for a new city hall. And that's been talked about for a long time.
Yeah, I can give you a little history on that. Back prior to the recession, we'd put out a request for proposal, and we're working with a group of developers to do a public-private joint venture to build a new city hall. It would include a hotel and then also some development on the 4+ acres that we have downtown. With that particular proposal, they were bringing financing to the table, and when the recession came, that financing went away, and the whole project kind of went away. We've continued to ask residents and groups what their opinion is about where City Hall should be, and at least right now it seems like the consensus among our community is continue to keep City Hall on the square. I think the question is how do we move forward? Do we consider again some type of request for proposal, which is an opportunity to develop that all or a portion of that property, or do we do it all by gradually working it into our budget from facilities fees and general fund? Right. There is money in the budget there was last year to start some study process on that, and we didn't spend it last year, but I anticipate that we'll start to move forward with spending some money studying that and starting to develop a plan to build a new city hall. The question is, why do we want to build a new city hall? It's not because we want another beautiful building on the square. It's because the building we're in was built back in the 50s. It's an old mall. It's very inefficient space. The structure regularly needs a lot of upkeep. People have asked about why don't we just renovate it. Well, renovating it is probably as much as building a new city hall. So I think we would look to move out of that eventually, build a new city hall on the square, have more modern space, more efficient space as far as energy consumption, and also a lot more efficient, because right now we have halls that are bigger than some bowling alleys, and there's not much you can do in there except walk, in which we
Right.
enjoy our citizens walking there in those halls, but hopefully we can get there in the next number of years, within that 10-year horizon.
Right. Next category is stormwater. It's one of those things we don't think about much, but developers think about it a lot, I know, and it's you can't just ignore the water. It's going to come down periodically, as it did this morning about 3 o'clock, and and you've got to have the capacity to move with it. There's a stormwater fee, I think, on my water bill, I believe it is, and I don't look at it very closely, but so that's going to pay most of those improvements. Is that right, Russ?
It is. So far, since we've started collecting that stormwater fee, all of the stormwater projects have been paid from those fees.
Okay. And then the next category, 22 of the projects, involve streets, and I guess in general transportation. Now, I didn't see Mac Hatcher on this list, and explain why Mac Hatcher's not on this list versus somebody else's list, Mr. Mayor.
Well, these are projects that have not had any funding given to them. Mac Hatcher, we've already got somewhere close to $7.5 million invested in that project, and we plan on putting another $1.25 million in it once the state funds it. So that they're put in a different bucket.
Right.
Just like you don't see Columbia Avenue on this one.
Right.
The reason you don't see it is because we already have dedicated 100% of the funding for Columbia Avenue from the state and the federal government.
Okay.
So projects that already have some funding started will not appear on this list, if I'm correct.
Well, speaking of Columbia Avenue.
Sure.
You and I have had this conversation offline, so I already know your answer, but, I've had multiple phone calls and another conversation, in person with businessmen on Columbia Avenue that are less than excited about the proposed improvements. And, one of whom made the suggestion, let's just take that money and do the southwest portion of McHatcher instead. Tell us why that's not a good idea.
Well, number one, we've already started the project. The project is funded. We've started the project. Number two, we don't know what the project looks like, so I think we need to clarify that is that there was a time whenever there was discussion about median divided 4-lane Columbia Avenue, but with this new start that we have, there's a blank slate.
Okay.
So right now, Barge Wagner Sumner Cannon, who is here this morning, is working with us. They got the contract for it. They've started the environmental. We've already had one public meeting, and we're going to move forward as far as looking at that. I would be totally against anything trying to tell the state that we're going to take this money and put it somewhere else. Number one, the horizon for Southwest McHatcher may never happen, and number two, if it were to happen, it's many, many, many years down the road. So, I mean, there hasn't been one pencil put to the paper other than somebody just saying, well, I think it needs to go right here. Nothing's been done. So I think that's
your job.
I think it's a bad idea to start trying to tell the state what we're going to do with the money. We had some experience a number of years ago before I was on the board where the state wanted to do Hillsborough Road. And at that time, the board said, no, we don't want to do the road like the state wants to do it. So the state said, fine, we'll take our money and go somewhere else. So today, when you drive down Hillsborough Road and you see all the work being done, most of that is being paid for by the city of Franklin and the taxpayers of Franklin, Tennessee. So we don't want to get in that situation again.
Right.
You know, we work from long-range plans that come from the MPO, come from our master transportation plan, and we got there not by a whim, but by a careful study and a thoughtful process. Jonathan represents us on the TCC part of MPO. I represent us on the MPO, and so we do a lot of long-range planning and scoring and rating to get where we're at.
Right. Jonathan, you look like you've got some thoughts about that.
One of the things I will say, and I'll add to what the mayor said, if we say, can we move that money? If we were to say that we don't want to do Columbia Avenue, we put that money kind of back in the hopper, say, and it comes from the MPO, so the Metropolitan Planning Organization helps divvy that federal funding out to the local communities through the state of Tennessee. If we were to say we don't want to do Columbia Avenue, which has been prioritized through that program, and we give the money back, we can't then tell them where that money is going to go. So what will happen is that money may go to somewhere in Murray County, may go to Davidson County. It'll go somewhere else. It won't go to where we tell it to go to. So that's a big one. So whenever we get that money from the federal government, whenever we get that participation, it's a very long range process to get that in the plans. And once they finally give us the go ahead, it's very specifically for that project.
Okay. Well, Jonathan, tell us a little bit about the projects that made this list and which ones maybe are the more high profile ones and
I would say one of the most high-profile ones is the McEwen Drive Phase 4 extension, the widening project, and that would be from the roundabout at Cool Springs Boulevard to Wilson Pike. So anybody who's driven that area knows it's a windy 2-lane road, steep slopes, very narrow lanes, no lighting, and if you've driven any of the other sections of McEwen Drive in the city of Franklin, it's nice 4-lane median divided, so that's what we're proposing for that one. But it's
right.
An extremely expensive project because you're going through a hillside.
Right. About $26 million, I think.
That's about right.
And how long is that segment of it?
A little over a mile.
So $26 million for a mile of 4-lane road.
Often it is 4-lane.
Right. there's a couple of projects involving Paytonsville Road, South Carruthers Road. Tell us what's planned down there and how that is all going to work together eventually.
Well, as you've seen in the area, and I'll go back since I've been here in 2005. When I first moved to Franklin, I lived in Carrington Hills off south. It was South Carruthers Parkway at the time, and I remember driving to the McKay's Mill Publix and had to drive around Edward Curd and drive down Liberty Pike. I was like, man, it'll be nice one day when the Carruthers is finished. And since I've moved to Spring Hill now, we've finished Carruthers Parkway. You can now drive Carruthers Parkway from Long Lane all the way to Moore's Lane continuously. So what we're proposing in the future is to extend Carruthers Parkway even further south. I think the short-term goal would be to tie that into Paytonsville Road and Goose Creek area. So you've got another north-south connector roadway, other than the interstate, other than Franklin Road, other than Lewisburg, Columbia Avenue. So that gives us something on the east side. And then we would also like to extend Paytonsville Road to connect to the Carruthers Parkway. So those two projects really tie together. You really can't do one without the other. One serves no purpose without the other.
Well, the looking at the maps, the eventually Paytonsville Road is gonna go right through to be part of Long Lane almost, so that you'll have a straight shot from the Goose Creek interchange.
That's correct.
All the way across Long Lane, which if anybody's ever driven across Long Lane and thinks about all the kids that make that trip every day going to Page High School from Franklin, you know, that should give parents let them sleep better at night, knowing that that crooked narrow road is going to have a better alternative.
Absolutely.
And so I was pleased to see that.
Brings up the comment about the Long Lane overpass. I think, you know, we agreed with the state that while they were building or widening I-65, that we would build Long Lane overpass at some point in the future. So they put those pillars, is that what you call them?
Bridge piers.
Bridge piers in place where the future Long Lane overpass will be.
Right.
As a board, and at least my impression of the board is we said, yeah, we're going to build it. We don't know what that horizon year is. But with the accident that occurred at the Paytonsville Bridge, I think we all suddenly realized how important an access from the east side to the west side is. And so I think that particular project is bubbled up closer to the top in the top tier of projects now.
Right. It can be very important, as we learn.
And we just dedicated the bridge, by the way.
Did we?
This past week, the Paytonsville overpass.
Well, and kudos to the state. We now have a 8-lane I-65 all the way through Franklin down to 840. So for the first time in how many years, we don't have any construction going on I-65 within our boundaries anyway. And that's got to be helping traffic. I'm noticing a difference on my commute.
As someone who drives that every day, it's a huge difference. It's nice to be able to drive actually to the exit you want to get off at.
Right. So thank you, Commissioner Schroer, for that.
Absolutely.
That piece of the puzzle being complete. Going back to East McEwen a bit, there's a Phase 5, and Jonathan, tell us how all that kind of fits together. We've got a lot of folks that work in Cool Springs, live in Rutherford County.
It's absolutely amazing if you go out there in the mornings, and really about 7:30 to 8:30, the traffic is just absolutely nonstop. And like you said, coming from Rutherford County, coming from Nolensville, in areas, you know, east of here and north of here, we see all that traffic coming into Cool Springs to go to work, or just going to I-65 to head somewhere else to go to work.
Right.
So what we see in the eventual extension of East McEwen Drive, Phase 4 goes to Wilson Pike, where it basically tees into Wilson Pike now. The east extension, or we call Phase 5, our portion of that would go to the Brentwood city limits, and it would extend McEwen Drive across the big three gas lines over there. Mm-hmm. Brentwood would then pick up their portion of McEwen Drive and extend it over to Clovercroft Road. So what a lot of people have talked about in the past is an extension between Sam Ridley Parkway and McEwen Drive, and really this is sort of, well, not sort of, it is a piece of that. Without being an overall plan, we're kind of doing small steps to get our way there. The traffic already uses that as the connector between Murfreesboro and like you said, Rutherford County.
Right.
So that's the small piece within the city of Franklin that we can affect. But if that section in particular is mostly developer driven, so once we receive the development fees, then we'll start construction on our section, and then Brentwood would follow suit to get that connection in.
Right. This, just from conversation with some of my friends that own airplanes, they would love to see that route improved so that they can fly out of the Smyrna airport and get to it from here. So you might want to talk, Rush, you might want to talk to the economic development guys with the state about helping get that moved up the list a little bit. Dr. Ken, Franklin Road improvements, streetscape on Franklin Road, it's about a $14 million piece of the puzzle. Tell us what's planned for that.
Well, you mentioned the word already, streetscape, and I don't know that we, somebody told me the other day we could quit using that. I'm still using it because it paints a certain picture in my mind. That particular segment of Franklin Road from the bridge going into downtown all the way out to Industrial Park, Court Park, or whatever the name of the street is. What is it again?
I think it's Harpeth Industrial.
Harpeth Industrial Road has been in the planning, and we're about to complete the plans on it. The reason that's so important is if you can connect or build sidewalks out to the area of the factory, that gives connectivity to our entire city.
Mm-hmm.
That means that somebody who lives on the east side of I-65 can get on a sidewalk and walk or bike to downtown Franklin. So improvements in that corridor are very important. And so we've looked at just building sidewalks, and there's lots of challenges as far as stormwater issues, infrastructure such as sewer, water, power. So this would kind of package all that together in one project.
Right. One other project that kind of attracted my attention for some reason is Lewisburg Pike improvements. For those of you that don't know, that's where I live. So I was a little surprised that wasn't an MPO or state-funded project. It didn't appear to be. It looked like the impact fees or something without looking back.
It is on the MPO's list. Unfortunately, it was ranked really low.
Okay.
As far as the overall general region, so that's something we've added to our list because we know there's a huge need. It's basically, we call that Lewisburg Pike, I believe, section, it's phase 3. So that's from Donaldson Creek Parkway up to Mack Hatcher Parkway. And if you drive that any morning,
Yep.
It's absolutely bumper to bumper. So we know that's a huge need in our community, and that may be something we'll continually try to get the state to participate because it is a state route. But it's something we see as a need for our community, and then we really want to try to address that as soon as possible. So we're trying to push that, but it's not something that we will ever stop asking the state for money for.
Right. And then several multi-use trails are mentioned, that I think some of us have seen other cities that have gotten connected with these multi-use trails and have seen the benefits of that. Where does that rank, Dr. Ken, as far as?
Well, if you do citizen surveys, you find that that's one of the top priorities for our citizens is connectivity through greenways and trails. So I think that we have a plan that outlines, actually it's in the Parks Master Plan, that outlines where we think some of those trails and greenways will occur. So it's just a matter of finding the funding, and some of those I think we can get grants for. For example, the current segment from Bicentennial to Chestnut Bend, part of that was a grant that
Right.
we used. That's a pretty exciting area, by the way, down around Bicentennial Park, and where you see all the big cranes and all the big pylons now. That's actually called Point Park, which will be an area where you can access the Harpeth River and also have a viewing area of the Harpeth River.
Right.
I anticipate that is going to be one of the hottest areas in our city in the future going forward as far as events and interaction
Mm-hmm.
in our community.
Awesome. One other area that we'll spend a couple minutes on, the time is flying by, but traffic operations. A lot of IT infrastructure, it looks like, is part of the plan. Russ, what's that all about?
Well, it's really probably Jonathan's forte, but the IT is intelligent transportation system.
That's correct.
Not,
Yeah.
not information technology.
Okay.
And it is something that's grant prone, if you will. A lot of the systems that we have in place today, and they're probably more than the average citizen realizes, has come to us through grants, 80-20. We have to match, but we get to really leverage our money in order to do that. For those of that in your audience that get stuck at traffic lights and get frustrated as I do, what that system would eventually do is allow us to both monitor and time the stoplights and the frequencies to be able to get a better throughput on our streets,
Right.
on our existing streets.
Now, in some of my reading for my job, I'm reading about eventually the cars being able to communicate with the traffic system so that you can slow down the cars that are headed toward the red light and time it more appropriately. Jonathan, is that even part of this thought down the road?
It is a part of the thought down the road. You're not seeing that in the current 10-year plan, but Tennessee Department of Transportation has started looking at smart cities, resilient cities, and that's something they've started to reach out to us about to partner with. But that's something you'll start to see down the road. But right now, really our ITS projects are focused on getting those corridors connected. So a good example of that is one of the projects that's fairly high on the list is Carruthers Parkway and Goose Creek, getting that on fiber optic connection. So all those new signals that are built along Goose Creek Bypass, Paytonsville Road, Long Lane, every one of those has timing built in. It's controlled by the detectors in the roadway. But to get those timings synced and to adjust timing, right now someone has to go out in the field to every one of those machines and adjust that timing. When we get those connected via fiber optic, that's something we can monitor from our traffic operations center.
Right.
Never have to send a soul out there, but we can adjust that timing from our main office on the fly. We can monitor traffic. We can, if you do dynamic message signing, you can actually tell motorists, hey, there's an issue in the area. So we already do that via Twitter.
Right.
But we are doing some adaptive signal control projects now
We
at
are.
Cool Springs and Mallory Lane, which rather than using some type of computer algorithm to determine when traffic signals change, it's actually real time based on signals. And Jonathan,
We're currently in the middle of that the design phase of that project, and what we're seeing is that the traffic levels vary in Cool Springs area on certain streets so much because there's so much business out there.
Right.
There's so many different uses in that area that it's hard to predict traffic. So we can't do a basic timing plan to adjust it on a time-based plan, or the detection just doesn't pick that up to the levels that we would want. So what the adaptive signal does, it actually takes all that detection information and adjusts those signals on the fly to help keep traffic moving along those main lines.
So we're currently doing that, or
We are
that's-
currently in the design process of doing that, so you
Good.
will see that implemented within the next year.
Right. Our time has flown by. I would like to leave a few minutes for our audience to ask questions if you've got any. If you have any questions for our guest this morning, if you would step up to the podium, we'd love to hear you your thoughts. Just identify yourself and tell us what you're interested in.
Good morning. My name is Michael Phillips. Mayor, Russ, Jonathan, appreciate you being here and taking time out of schedule. I got a quick question that either of you may be able to answer. As the city continues to grow, are there plans to have the footprint grow and annex areas that are currently not in the city? And if so, where?
well, there's a lot of muddy water now about annexation. Back in 2001, was it? When was the
1998
1998?
was 1101.
1101 was passed by the Tennessee General Assembly, which set urban growth boundaries for communities. And we worked within that urban growth boundary as far as where we projected our growth and where we would build out infrastructure and where we would annex. When the General Assembly started trying to tweak annexation, that's caused some confusion in our mind. So I think there's still some question marks out there about, does the urban growth boundary still exist? Well, we're still using it ourselves, but there's still a lot of cloudy things that the General Assembly has not cleared up as far as that issue. Am I answering your question?
And I may have missed it, just so
We have an urban growth boundary that we work with as far as where we plan to grow. We potentially might look at expanding that urban growth boundary, particularly in the most southern area of the city, because a number of people are requesting that they be annexed, their property be annexed into the city in that southernmost tip.
Is it fair to say today that the only annexation that we can do is if you come to us and ask to be
Yes.
annexed?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen. My name is David Bach. My question would probably be for you, Mayor. You mentioned smaller IT security projects. What is the city's kind of 10-year vision in regard to infrastructure, security, cyber security? As we all know, ransomware attacks are on the rise, and there's a lot more and more breaches, even of cities and things like that. Is there kind of a longer-term vision as far as infrastructure protection?
That's a great question, and I'm going to be limited on how I can answer that, and because I didn't bring the head of our IT. Russ may be able to address that.
I'd tell you, but then we'd have to kill you. So, we're very concerned. It keeps us up at night.
Yes, sir.
We've taken a lot of steps. We don't advertise all the steps that we have taken, but I can't emphasize enough how concerned we really are. Some of our sister jurisdictions have been hacked. We've been fortunate enough to avoid that so far, but they're getting smarter, so we're trying our best to keep up with them. But we do have professionals that are assisting us in looking at all of the issues regarding that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. Good question.
Any more questions from our audience? Ms. Mindy?
Mindy Tate with Franklin tomorrow. Mayor, I appreciate your mentioning earlier connectivity and the Parks Master Plan update, the Greenway system. At a recent CIP meeting or from a workshop, you all talked about sidewalk gaps. And can you talk a little bit about the potential to maybe really impact the connectivity in our community through a maybe one-time investment over a couple years in creating and filling in those sidewalk gaps, and how that can be a positive, really, return on the health of our community?
Well, this was an item that was discussed in one of our work sessions as we were reviewing the capital projects plan, and there were comments about sidewalk gaps in our community, and the board thought that it would be a good idea to allocate a certain portion of funding to sidewalk gaps. And at the same time, we asked the staff to help us find those gaps, give us a list of them so that we can look at those more critically. You know, when you look at Franklin, Tennessee, you think, well, boy, everybody can just walk every place. But whenever we look at our walkability score, we don't score high because we do have those gaps. So to be a healthier community, it's important to continue to address that ability to walk, whether it's on trails, greenways, or sidewalks. And by the way, we were named by the governor one of 3 communities that received the designation of healthier community. We were picked as a pilot community last year, and this year, thanks to our partnership with Franklin Tamara, Get Fit Franklin, Vanderbilt, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Williamson Medical Center, all those partners, and I hope I didn't leave anybody out, but we attained that goal of being a healthier community. What does that mean? Well, it means we've done certain things to raise awareness as far as tobacco cessation, as far as having a health care council, as far as having programs for people to participate in to get more fit. But we still have a long way to go, and we'll continue to try to focus more on how we can continue to be not only the healthiest community in the state of Tennessee, but how we can rank up there nationally with other healthy communities.
Well, we, personal note here, my family and I recently spent some time in Orange Beach, Alabama, and I hadn't been on a bicycle probably in 30 years. But they've got an amazing system of trails down there that, you know, I'm not going to get out on these roads on a bicycle, but that was fun. We did about a 10-mile bike ride one day, and all back in the woods, back in the fields, and so don't assume that I would not be open to consider having the city come across the back of our property. I noticed on the plan that you've got multi-use trails going down Lewisburg Pike in front of my house, but we got a beautiful river right behind our house, and
Bulldozer will be over there today.
just don't assume I'm totally against that idea. The boys actually expressed the thought that it'd be nice if they could just get on their bicycle and ride all the way to Pinkerton Park or to the rec center, which I was interested that they would make that observation. So it's just a lot of fun, especially if you can kind of relax when you're riding the bike instead of worrying about, you know, what's driving up behind you. So I think that covers all the things I had in mind. Anything else you all would like to mention? We got
well, I think one thing we should mention, we've talked about a lot about projects, we've talked about funding, we've talked about where the money comes from, but I think that it's important to emphasize that Franklin is a AAA rated credit by both Standard & Poor and Moody's, and we attribute so much of that to not only our board, who is very focused on being physically sound, but also on the leadership of Russ Truell, who does such a great job for us on our finances and working with all of our advisors.
One of the things I would want to tell your audience is that we understand that there's not enough money to do all of this. And so we come at this from really two directions. I mean, the board is very interested in prioritizing which are the more important projects.
right.
And they bring that, and as a part of the convergence, we bring our ability to pay for those with that.
Right.
And the mayor mentioned the bond rating. We use a lot of the metrics that the bond rating agencies use when they look at us,
Right.
to determine what that capacity is. So there's a lot of thought that goes into this. The board's very much involved in how we bring those two things together to find the funding for these many projects that are badly needed.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate the work you do. Being on the board of mayor and alderman is a thankless job.
Yes.
I know at times, and the staff takes a lot of abuse from different people, but we know you're working hard, and we appreciate the effort. Let's wrap up. Thanks for you all for being here. We appreciate the participation of our audience. Just thank you all for coming and sharing all your thoughts with us, Dr. Moore, Russ, Jonathan. Couldn't happen without Newt Danley and his team with WCTV Channel 3, and can't say how much we appreciate their help, and to Mayor Rogers Anderson and his office for allowing this to happen too. Chamber staff puts a lot of work in behind the scenes, and also Christine Bradley and Lynn Maddox from the Vanderbilt Office of Community Development helped make it happen financially. So we appreciate all the input. We now have WAKM and Tom Lawrence making it happen on the radio simultaneously, and just appreciate everyone's help. Next show will be July 29th. Our guest will be Williamson County Mayor Rogers Anderson, and we'll be talking about some of the same things from the county perspective, capital improvements, and maybe a little bit about the Williamson County Fair. So hope you all join us. Look forward to having you back next month. Thank you.
Good job, guys.